working for money.
Yeah, we're working for money. Come on, let's be honest.
My job might be fun, but I'm not
Yeah,
working for fun. So like let's level set.
yeah. And let's not be so. And the other thing that ends up happening is like, so an employee comes in and says, look, I need to pay more money. Like, this is what it is. I have this offer. And then the company will begrudgingly give them more money and then put like a target on their backs. Like,
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
like, what's wrong? I think if you know your worth and you're doing a great job and your company's not, you owe it. Like, if you're out there in a company right now, your company's not paying you, the market's not. You have the opportunity. You need to ask for more money. Like you do.
Welcome back to Secrets of a Corporate Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtain and unveil some of those secrets with tips and tricks that you can apply today to start taking control of your career and progress up the ladder faster. Welcome back, lovelies, to another fabulous episode of Secrets of the Corporate Game. Today, we are going to talk about creating a great company culture and organization with Suman Chery. She has over 20 years of experience in recruiting in various different industries. So she's worked in medical, oil and gas, construction, real estate. And at heart, she's really just a matchmaker, right? She's pairing people up with the right company. And she understands a lot of the challenges that companies face in hiring, that we face getting hired, and is dedicated to creating a really good experience for everybody who's involved. So welcome, Suman. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it. So
Yeah. So
fun.
why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background and your history in the corporate world and get them up to speed?
Yeah, so I have been, not to age myself too much, but I've been recruiting for quite a long time. I started recruiting a little over 20 years ago, I guess. And I started off in medical recruiting, and I did that for a company out of Dallas. And I did that. And then I moved into like oil and gas recruiting because I moved back to Houston, so which kind of makes sense for the energy market. And then over the last 7 years, I guess I've been doing a lot of recruiting in the construction space. But in between, lots of other little things like restaurants and property management companies and just lots of different hodgepodge of recruiting. It's interesting because I got into recruiting because was recruited in my early 20s. And I was like, what do you do? He's like, I'm a recruiter. I'm like, I want to do this. This is what I want to do. And then it just was a good match for me. My background's, I got a degree in communications, public relations. I'm a people person. I'm nosy. I want to know people. So, so it was like a perfect match for me. So yeah, 20 years later, I'm still doing it.
I love it. And we were talking right before the episode started. I'm sure being a recruiter and the job market now is very different, right? The generations being hired are very different. The way companies are operating very different. So I'm really excited to kind of dive in and get a lot of your thoughts today on how this has evolved over time. And it's funny, I'm from Texas originally, from Dallas. I live in Colorado now, but anytime I meet a Texan, like so awesome. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about how companies can really integrate their core values and culture into their hiring process? Because I'm sure you can empathize. I see like the golden plaques in the hallway, the mission statement on the website, but maybe the company doesn't live it day to day. So what are some of those ways they can kind of bring those pieces together for the end person being recruited?
I mean, I think the main piece is that, it's not a piece of paper, right? Your core values dictate your behaviors around those core values. And those behaviors are the standards for your organization. And that's what the leaders are the ones that have to live those core values and those behaviors, not even just from in a workspace, but in their everyday life. That's the companies that really live them. They're leaders that live it in their everyday life, like as parents or as friends, as humans in general, right? So it is more than the plaques and the jackets and we are this, but if you're not living that, it doesn't actually exist, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like and it's not your people's responsibility to create that. You as an organization, you have to create that and you set that standard of choice. And this is what I do at my organization. I've created a business that there's standards of behaviors around those core values. And then it's up to people to choose to match those or not. but I live them and my leaders live them. And so that's what I would say is the difference between a company that really lives it and just has the plaques.
Yeah. There's so many directions I want to take this and so many questions that I have, but it's interesting because Friday was the big crowd strike sitch. Okay. So by the time this episode comes out, people will be like, what are you talking about? But, it's a big crowd strike thing. And I was actually at a CIO conference with the best CIOs in my state. And one of the CIOs was asked, what do you think is the number one piece of advice you have? And he said, don't just say you have a culture, live your culture. If you and your leaders aren't acting it out every single day, your team's not going to live it out. Disconnect when you take PTO. Don't send emails on the weekends. Like, live the culture you want your employees to have, because otherwise they'll match your energy, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it is an energy. I mean, I'm all about the energy. Everything is energy, right?
Yeah.
I could go into a whole show about energy.
Whole separate episode.
I mean, it's a whole thing, but it is. You create it's like, what is your role as an organization? Your role is to create an environment of thriving. Your role is to live the core values that you set forth. Your role is to create safety and a space where people can have advancement and transparency and authenticity. And your role is to hire really good people and fire the ones that don't match. I mean, that is your role as leaders, ultimately.
So I'd love to get your thoughts on this. I talk a lot, I've talked about it on the podcast, I talk about it in my book, on this concept of ghost culture, which is, to me, every company has a ghost culture, and that's, what's on the plaque, what's on the website, that's what you get in your handy dandy notebook once a year. But then there's like the reality of the culture that we live. And so much of that is dependent not only on leadership, but on your direct manager, right? So I'd love to hear from your perspective, what is that connection between the executive leaders who may be living the culture? How do they maintain that down to the middle management layers who also have a huge impact on like the day-to-day experience for the individual?
So I think a lot of that is an information piece, right? So I think if you are an organization that has the right values and the core values, the information that you're receiving is from the bottom up. So like you are hearing it from here up versus it being this directive is all coming down and then somehow getting lost in translation. You have to know what's going on all levels of an organization as a leader to be able to, like, we as an organization, like, we have a lot of activity reports and those types of things where we are like meeting every week and we're like, what's your activity? What's your activity? Where are the gaps as leaders? What can we put in from an implementation place to help those gaps? But if middle management doesn't have the understanding of what those gaps are, because they're thrown in the trenches and they're having to manage all these things and they're overwhelmed and there isn't that safety. Yeah, the leaders can be like, oh yeah, we're all those things. But if your managers aren't feeling that and you're not coaching them, you're not guiding them, you're not teaching them, then they can't. It's all about, like, they say people have to buy into your story, right, of an organization, right? So if everyone doesn't know what that story is or what that mission is and aren't living that story, and that includes your managers, it's going to correlate in a sense where the managers are going to be either micromanagers or distant or reactive, and they're going to create a culture of fear and within their people,
I want to add something to this that you mentioned earlier, and slightly polarizing, but we love to do that on the podcast, is it's also your job as a leader to be willing to fire when somebody is not the right fit. Because there's both sides of this coin. A lot of companies don't do exactly what you're describing. They don't provide guidance. They don't provide coaching. They don't provide training. They're like, congrats, you're a manager. You have 32 people. Good luck to you. And then 11 years later, on average, per Forbes, they get training, which is way too late, right? But the flip side is also we have a lot of leaders who are afraid to say, hey, you're not the right fit for the organization. And that creates its own trickle-down effect of problems, because then the wrong people are hiring more wrong people. And you've got this cascade. So it's a somewhat polarizing, because I think we all want to help encourage people to be to their best level. But there's also the right fit.
There is the right fit, and that's a very scarcity way of seeing things, right? And I see that with organizations where they have managers or mid leaders who are not the right matches, and they're hesitant to make that change. But it's causing, like you said, it's attracting the wrong type of people within the organization. And so, as the leaders, your role is also to not keep people in the organizations that don't match your values. And like, it's really easy to see because you have these behaviors are these managers, doing these behaviors? You've taught them how to do these behaviors. And if they're not doing them, it's pretty easy to let them go at that point, but people get scared. Like, what is that going to look like? And what responsibility? What we can't find someone? What if we lose this? It's like this whole kind of like trauma response in a way that people are afraid to hire. Hiring is really, really scary. People hold on to the wrong matches. It's just like dating, right? People hold on to those toxic relationships because they're so scared to let go of what's comfortable. But in order to create something new, you can't do it the same way all the time, because then you just struggle and you suffer in that. So, yeah.
I draw the parallel to relationships all the time in my coaching, because that exact reason of like the red flags we ignore in companies are the same red flags we ignore in partners. It's like the same life.
Oh my gosh.
But it's funny that you say that, because Barbara Cochran, and I've quoted this before, is she has an interview where she says, I love firing people. She goes, Fridays are my firing days. They're my favorite days. I love it. And I think that gets a bad rep. But she goes on to say, because if I'm firing you, I've already coached you. I've already guided you. I've already given you the tools, and you've proven that you're not going to be a right fit, and you're pulling down the rest of my team. So firing you is the best thing I can do for my organization, which I think is super valid. I could have used better language perhaps in our interview, but I'm with her on like the ultimate point, right? You had mentioned something that I think is really key, which is once we fire, then we have to hire. And I work with so many managers who are nervous about the hiring process. Yeah. So what would be some strategies you would guide people to say, okay, I want to find the best candidates who are going to align with my company's culture, with my team, who are going to be a good fit? What are some of the ways hiring managers can do that in that process?
Well, I think the first piece is you have to get away from this unicorn idea, right? This idea that companies have where there's this like unicorn, right? First of all, most companies just focus so much on ability. But a lot of times ability is just this belief they have where it's like, oh, they have to have this 50 things. But really, a lot of those things are trainable, learned. And you just have to focus on the essential pieces that they need to have. And what's more important is the soft skills. Like the soft skills, like we teach our clients, because the way that we recruit is different than other recruiting agencies in the sense that we focus so much on the soft skills because it's so important. We understand that the ideal person is going to be humble. They are going to be good with people. They are going to be good communicators. They are going to be hungry and they're going to be motivated. And you have to be able to look outside just a resume and ask those real poignant questions and really pay the attention to how they answer through those. And if you have a gut response that it's a no, then go with your gut. Like, I don't know how many times like I hear clients are like, well, I knew he wasn't the right match, or I knew she wasn't, but we really needed this person. And now, of course, it's 6 months later, it's not the right match, Yeah. So you got to you got to be able to listen. You got to be able to watch the body language. You got to be able to see and like ask the right questions and really like take the biasness out of it. You can like someone and they still may not be a good match for your organization. Yeah. That's the truth.
Okay. So for anybody listening, this is where we'll be spending the remainder of the episode, because this is my favorite topic on the planet. And we're just going to spend the next 20 minutes. I'm just kidding. But so there's so much in what you just shared that I think is vital for anybody who is a hiring manager to hear, but also if you are interviewing, because I've worked with lots of recruiters. I've recruited, thousands over the course of my career. I've coached more. I've run executive teams. And I always tell recruiters, I want somebody who is a good team player, who is willing to learn new stuff, and who isn't afraid to try and get things wrong. The rest of the technical skills, I just don't care. If you find somebody who has the technical skills that I'd love to have, great. That's like a cherry on top. But if they don't have those three things, I don't even want to talk to them. And I can tell you in the first 5 seconds of an interview if I'm going to hire somebody or not. Almost always. That's not to say that they don't have a chance to change my mind over the course of the interview, or that they can't bring up a great example that I'm like, wow, really, that surprised me. But usually, even in the way somebody tells me about their work experience, I can tell if they're humble. I can tell if they're hungry. I can tell if they're a good communicator, if they like people. That very first question, by the end of that, I'm like, oh, you're probably not going to be the right fit. Or I'm like, this person's a rock star, and I'm already messaging my boss, like, when's your availability this week? Can we get him in for the next round? Right? So What
Right.
are some of the ways people can display these skills in your experience? Because I do think this is so important. The soft skill side,
Yeah.
it's nuanced. Somebody can say, oh, I know how to code in Salesforce. Great. But if I'm looking for you're a great communicator, how do they display that?
Well, I think the thing is that people, it's similar, right? The types of people that match these types of key attributes are similar in the sense like somebody who is a humble person, they don't spend their entire interview just giving themselves credit for everything. They're able to give other leaders or other mentors or other people they had on their teams that type of recognition as well because it's okay for them. They're able to own their mistakes. They can admit they had mistakes. Like, yeah, I made mistakes. I did this wrong and I learned from this and this is how I grew from this. People who are non-reactive people, in my experience, the more questions you ask a candidate or a person in general, if somebody's a very reactive based person, they get annoyed when you start like, why are you asking me these questions? What do you ask? What is this? They start getting into the mind. Their mind is all like, oh, mine, mine, mine. But in my feeling is people who are very good at communicating and are more responsive based people, they tend to understand that it's okay to answer questions and they're comfortable with questions, which is a funny thing. And then people who are hungry and smart are hungry and motivated. It's pretty easy to understand that. The tricky piece about that is that a lot of times people will want someone who has this exact experience.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you're finding the information on this podcast helpful and you're looking to take control of your career and start to elevate yourself to the next level, go ahead and check out our course. Go to bit.ly/career coach course to get signed up today and to start taking your career to the next level and navigate the secrets of the career game.
But those people aren't always hungry and motivated because they've been doing the same job for 15 years and they're like, oh, it's this again. But hungry and motivated people, they're excited, they're asking questions, they're engaged, they're asking your organization questions like, hey, can you answer this about this, and I had questions about this, and whatever that is. They're asking questions. They're not just passive in the interview. They're
Yeah.
more like interactive in that sense because they understand their own worth, so they're able to feel comfortable to ask questions as well. The people smart piece is always the hardest piece because people are really good at like people are really good at hiding that part, right?
Turn it
But
on.
they can turn on and turn off, but when you ask questions about weakness and you dive into those questions and you dive into this and you're asking more questions, it's a really good indicator of someone who is reactive versus responsive because the more questions you ask, somebody's a very reactive person is going to get annoyed with all the questions versus someone who's very responsive. It's going to be like, I understand why they're asking me this. They're going to see that person because I feel like people who have like a very strong people skills, they can step into other people's shoes and they can see it from another perspective other than just their own, if that makes sense.
I love that you're giving this tactical tip of like ask follow-up questions, go deeper, get more information. Because I think a lot of the time as hiring managers, we can feel uncomfortable doing that because we
Yeah.
don't want them to think they said something wrong. So we play nice. But I love that as a tactic to find out more about the person. And to your point of them asking you questions, I actually was discussing this with my COO and my CTO Friday. And they said that's the biggest red flag for them in an interview. If you don't have any questions for me about the organization, I can already tell you you're the wrong hire because you're not interested, you're not motivated, you don't care, you're not thinking ahead, and you want somebody who's invested. Meanwhile, I'm that person that comes to the interview and I'm like, I'm so glad you asked. Do you have 20 extra minutes? Because I have a list of 52 questions that have come up over the course of my interviews that I'd love clarification on.
Yes.
And so I do think that those are great tips for hiring managers. Ask those additional probing questions, see who asks questions back and who asks thoughtful questions.
Right.
I'm going to admit to being part of the problem here. There are plenty of people on LinkedIn who are like, ask these 3 questions at the end of your interview. What does success look like in the first 90 days for this role? What challenges will this individual face? Is there anything I haven't covered in this interview that you'd like to know, right? Don't ask those. Ask questions that show you actually care about either the company culture or the role itself.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to impress a hiring manager is, oh, they did their research on the role, or they're asking me about language in the rec, or they're asking me about something that I said. Because those generic questions, sure, like maybe they help you make a decision. They probably don't, but maybe they do. But more importantly, they're not going to show interest. And it's like dating. The
It
company wants
is
to
like
feel like you're
dating.
interested, you
It
know?
is like dating. It really is. I mean, I make this joke all the time. I'm like, it is dating. I mean, in a way, because it's almost like a marriage, right? You're bringing someone in, and like not right away a marriage, but like you're courting them and you're having conversations and you're seeing if they're interested and you're interested and if it's a good match and the values match. I think
Mhm.
the values piece is really important. Like when we ask questions, we ask these like very kind of off the cuff questions that maybe like people are like, we ask them about like, what did you do? What kind of jobs did you have in high school? And like, what did you do? And like, we're asking
Mhm.
like kind of more off, who would you say is better at what you do than you are, and why are they better? Like, we want to know, like, really who the person is, right? Like we want to understand them and we want to understand what makes them tick. Well, like no one's perfect. None of us are perfect. Like we all have our own, I mean, all of us, right? But it's about like, do their values align with our values as an organization? Like, cause that is the biggest piece, just like a relationship, like they have to have the same values. If you're someone who like most companies have the same values, but let's just say integrity and all these things and honesty and responsibility and accountability, and you have someone you're interviewing with who may on paper has like everything, like, oh my gosh, they're the best, but they can't take any type of responsibility for choices they made and they're blaming someone else, so that's not going to be the right value, no matter how good they look on paper
Yeah.
or
And I think that
whatever.
goes back to your unicorn talent comment from earlier. This is something that I see a lot, especially in remote work. We now have a global recruiting platform, right? A lot of companies can literally hire anywhere in the world. You don't have to be co-located. You don't have to be near an office. And they've got this laundry list of like, must have these 67 technical skills, these 82 soft skills, must be able to touch their finger to their nose and scratch their stomach at the same time, like whatever
Yes.
is on this crazy
Oh,
list. And they over recruit, right? There's a position in my organization that's been open for 9 months. I'm like, there's no
yeah.
way in heck we haven't met a single good person in 9 months, guys. Like, we
Right.
got to be also realistic here. So, I think there's this unicorn piece that holds up recruiting, helps us overlook potentially great talent. And then
Right.
there's the soft skill piece of like, how do we display it? But then let's say we find them, we find our unicorn, we hire them, they're in the company, everything is wonderful. How do we keep them? Because you talk a lot about
Yeah.
fostering growth with like employee engagement and focusing on retention. Like, what are some of the ways managers and hiring managers, organizational leaders can really help those hires then have an exceptional experience on the other side?
I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the leaders taking an interest in the people from the beginning, right? Like their employees, taking the time to really understand who they are, like what's their ticks, and really having a deeper understanding of where the weaknesses are going to be, because we're all going to have the weaknesses and the strengths, and being able to coach to grow the strengths, and then also be able to let them like have their mistakes, right? And then teaching those mistakes, right? Because your mistakes are going to happen. I think a lot of times companies have this unrealistic expectations. They bring people in, first of all, like these 9-month positions, right? We've recruited 3,000 people. You should be honored to work for us, And then there's a lot of fear from the organization, like, what if they leave? What if they leave? So they're almost looking for something to be wrong with them in a way. And then what ends up happening is they don't spend the time to really build those kind of more of a personal relationship than just the job part, like building that safety where they feel safe to be able to have authenticity with their leaders, transparency with their leaders, to be able to relay situations and giving them just time. Like, because a lot of times they don't even do the small things, like take them to lunch, have a conversation, check with them, know your people, like you need to know your people. It's very important to know your people. And
Yeah.
if you can, and I think for me, like, I think fun is so important in an organization. Like, I bring a lot of fun. I want us to have fun. I want us to laugh. I want us not to take everything so serious. I want us to have team things because that's important, I just think it is. And I think if you want to create the right organization, you have to, as leaders, get to know your people and create environments of thriving for them, advancement, having those conversations. And really, those first 3 months are crucial for that, because that first 3 to 6 months, I don't think companies understand, like, those people, those employees, they've never worked for you. Like, they don't know you. You guys all know each other, but they're walking into this new environment. It's your job to create safety for them, for them to shine their light, so to speak, right? And
I love this. And it is the onus on the manager, right? And I make plenty of mistakes in my career, just to go on record, even as a leader, even as a manager. People I managed 10 years ago, I promise I'm way better now. Like, just ignore that whole
yeah,
experience.
yes, for
But
sure. Me too.
I was joking. I hired somebody at the start of this year. And when I interviewed him, the question he asked at the end of his interview was, how do you handle when your team makes mistakes? And I thought that was a really thoughtful question and also spoke a lot to his past work trauma, right? Because
Yes.
if you're asking,
Yeah.
you've had a manager who didn't do it well, let me tell you.
Yeah.
And, I answer, I said, my job is to run interference. It's to protect you guys so that you can operate. I will always take a mistake on myself to give you guys the space to make them and to be successful and to learn. And I give a specific example of something that had happened recently and how I handled it. So fast forward 3 months, he's working for me and he makes his first mistake. We're right around the 90-day mark. And this is, high performer type A. Dude is panicked. He is like pinging me 82 times, like, oh my gosh, I messed this thing up. This is wrong. I'm freaking out. And we hopped on a call with the executives and I was like, listen, I made a mistake. This went out, should have been proofread, falls on me. My team's correcting it. Here's what we're doing in the future to make sure this never happens again. Any questions? And the team was like, nope, that's cool. And we got off the call and he calls me and he's like, oh my God, you actually did it. And I was like, you poor thing. Yes,
Yeah.
I got your back. But so many managers
Oh, it's
don't
terrifying.
create that environment. They let you fail,
No.
they'll hang you out to dry.
Oh, it's
And
terrible.
you experience it so often that, to your point, who wants to stay and work for that person? You don't feel safe. You don't feel like you
No.
have an authentic relationship. You don't feel like they care
No.
about you. So I think if anybody's listening, if you're a manager, middle management, upper management, and you take one thing away from this, what I would tell you is the advice to create a safe space for your team to make mistakes. Number one, for retention. Like, people stay with me. Most of my team I've recruited in my current role all work for me in my previous company. And I just was like, coming with me again. Here you go. Because they know that they can come, they can make mistakes, they have a space to learn, and they won't
Yeah.
be hung out to dry. And that's not always the case. So I think that's a huge, huge piece. I'd love to hear on the other side, what are some, like, DEI and employee engagement are so big right now, whether they're used as a buzzword, Microsoft, or if they're like a real integrated part of your company. What are some programs that can be established that do help with that retention, right? Something that's slightly more formal than just like the way that the manager holds things. What does that look like for organizations who want to start to elevate in that space?
I mean, I think there needs to be strong incentive programs, right? I mean, money is important. I mean, let's be honest. Like, you need to pay your people, right? Like, if they're doing a great job, they need to be paid. Like, it's just what it is. You need to be always looking at the salary trends and understanding if you're paying your people what the market is or beyond what the market is. And you need to have incentives that they can hit, commissions, incentives, or whatever that looks like for you as an organization. But you need to have those types of places where people can come in and they can have goals and they're attainable to reach. I think that's really that simple. I mean, don't get wrong. I think people love like all the little, like the snacks and the things and that, but like, come on, like, let's give them some money, right?
I was just
Let's
going to
pay
say,
people.
it's not the pizza party on Fridays.
No, you're not wrong. Maybe they're like a pizza party, but let's pay people. Like, let's pay them what they're worth. Your people, like, don't wait in the sense where you like lose this top talent and then you're having to pay someone else coming in 30 to 40% more because you didn't pay the person well or you didn't have this, and then you decide to do all the incentive programs. No, do them now. Like, treat your people well. If your people are producing and they're doing a great job and they're a great energy for your team, go get them. Like, the other day, like one of my recruiters is just like excelling and I'm like, hey, here's a $200 gift card, like go enjoy yourself with it. Like, it's a small thing, right? But for me, it's like, I want to give the people that are doing a great job, I want to give them the opportunity to make more money. That's really it. I want to pay them well.
I love this. And any organizational leaders who are listening, start paying your people. I'm just saying. Because I will say, company that I work for now, it's the only company I've ever worked for that does this. But if you say you're leaving, or even if you don't, even if you just say, hey, like, I need more money, what they say is, hey, we've done market research on your position. Here's the baseline salary that we would have to post to replace you. You can choose to accept that salary. You can choose to look internally, or you can choose to leave. And we give that option to everybody. And I've never worked for a company that
Amazing.
proactively was like, do you want more money or do you want
Yes,
to
that's
look somewhere
amazing.
else? And one of the first people that I lost when I joined this team, I gave him that option, said, hey, to replace you is going to cost me a lot. I'd love for you to stay. Here's what that would look like. And he was like, listen, I'm going in a different direction in my career path. I really appreciate that you gave me the chance to like take that money. That's really kind of you. They ended up leaving. We ended up coming back to our company 6 months later in that department he had been transitioning to. And now he's one of my mentees and he and I meet every quarter. We talk about stuff because
I love that.
to your point, we're working for money.
Yeah, we're working for money.
It's-
Come on, let's be honest.
My job might be fun, but I'm not working
Yeah.
for fun. So like let's level set.
Yeah, and let's not be so. And the other thing that ends up happening is like, so an employee comes in and says, "Look, I need to pay more money. Like this is what it is. I have this offer," and then the company will begrudgingly give them more money and then put like a target on their backs, like
Yeah,
And it's
absolutely.
like, what's wrong? I think if you know your worth and you're doing a great job and your company's not, you owe it. Like if you're out there in a company right now, your company's not paying you, the market's not. You have the opportunity. You need to ask for more money. Like you do.
Yeah.
You do.
Well, and I think that's so true because, I think 2% is a number I always hear thrown out. Annual raise is 2%, 2 to 4, if you work for like a standard company. And, inflation's like a bajillion percent. And we're just like, here's 2%. Thanks so much. Hope you can buy groceries this week.
Yeah.
But I think of, being in the coaching business is so interesting on the flip side because I have my corporate job where I see how the company runs and then I have coaching. And I'll have clients come to me and they're like, okay, well, my last job paid $600,000. And I'm like, you should have kept that job. Like, that's not even reasonable, right? Good for them. Good for you. That's great. That's probably not going to happen again, just being candid.
Right.
And then the flip side, I have people come to me doing the exact same job where like my last company paid me 45. And I'm like, this is not
Yeah.
guys, right. So there's onus on the company, pay your people. You want them to stay, you want them to be happy, especially if you're a high workload, you're a stressful environment.
Yeah.
Like, adequately pay them for that. And the flip side to the employee is ask for what you need.
Right.
So often I see people wait until they're at the point where they're like, I have to quit. There is no staying. There
Right.
is no option. I'm like, well, did you ask your boss for a raise?
Right.
Did you ask for a promotion? They're like, well, no, I just thought he'd give it to me. And you're like, well, probably not. So like, should we have asked maybe? So there's
Yeah.
onus on both sides, but I
Oh,
agree with you. I love mentorship. I love innovation programs. I love pizza parties on Friday. I'll be honest. But in the end, people stay for the money and the
I mean,
boss.
they do. I mean, if you're not paying your people what they're worth, and if you are an employee and you're expecting, you need to make the choice that you stand in your authority and your own standards and say, look, I need a raise, or that's it. I know what the market is. I know what my value is. And either you give me this raise. It's not a hostage thing. It's more like, this is my value. And like, that's what it is. But companies get really so upset when people do that.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh.
The
It's so,
hostage negotiation, I think, is a great.
yes, it's the hostage negotiation.
And what
But
I tell clients all the time is tell them, hey, I've done some research. Here's some recs I found. Now, a lot of states have to post their salaries, right? So like I live in
right,
Colorado, they have to post salary. New York has to, California has to. Hey, here's some recs I've seen. Here's the salary ranges they're posting. And here's where I am.
right,
I'm going to give you all this information to make a good decision.
right.
I would love to get in that range and stay. Power is now in your hands. Because then if they don't match it, you've literally proven there are other jobs you could go get that make that salary.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's not a threat. It's not a, hey, if you don't pay me, I'm going to leave and go
No.
get a job at Google. It's a, hey, I'm doing market research. This is what I'm seeing the position is worth. I'd love to continue doing this position for you. I'm giving you the chance to make that a reality.
Yeah.
Will you take that option or not? Right.
It's not an emotional piece. Like,
Exactly.
I think the thing is people get so emotional around money. Like, it shouldn't be so emotional. Like, it's not an emotional piece. It's an energetic exchange. It really is. They're giving you money for like, it's an energy exchange. So if the exchange isn't balanced, then there needs to be balance. You either need to stay with that organization and ask for that, and the company has a choice to do it, or you go and find an opportunity where they will give you the value that you believe to be true. And then there's also the other piece, like the 600. We have to be realistic as well. Like, we can't be unreasonable. Like, you know what I mean? There needs to be some of that as well. So it is like a ownership on all sides. It's not the company's fault. It's not the employee's fault. There's like a lot of And that's a lot of it on a communication piece more than anything else, right?
Yeah,
I think,
exactly. You've got to have that two-way communication. That's what it all comes down
yeah.
to.
So,
And the theme of the episode is just like dating. So,
just like it.
so as we're getting to the end, Suman, this has been such a wonderful chat.
Yeah,
I
it's been
feel like you
fun.
touched on so many things that completely resonate with my perspective. I love hearing it from the recruiter side of like, what should companies be doing, managers, the recruitees. But if anybody's listening to this episode and they take one piece of advice from you, what's one thing you would tell listeners like, hey, tomorrow, go do this, make sure you're doing this? What would that be?
So if I was looking at like an employer, I would say if you don't have your core values and your core behaviors done, and you're not like you don't even have them written, go sit down and write some, and
Mm-hmm.
really think about what your core values are and how they correlate to your core behaviors, and start implementing that into your organization. That is so huge. That is so
Yeah.
huge.
I love
Yeah.
that. And I think even if you're a manager who works for a company that doesn't have their core values established, do it
You
for your
create.
team.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't have the influence to change it for the whole company, but do it for your team. Write them down, know what you want, be that leader, lead the example,
Yeah.
because I totally agree with you. I think that sets the tone for everything. So this is awesome. So if people want to find you, if they want to learn more about your perspective, your background, your recruiting agency, where do they go? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, I'm all over LinkedIn, so you can find me, Suman Chery. But my website is cherrytalentgroup.com, and it gives us a pretty good breakdown of who we are and what we do and how our recruiting works. And yeah, I mean, we're pretty transparent as an organization, so you can reach out to me, and I'm pretty much like this all the time. This is me, so
I love
you
it.
know,
True to
yeah,
self. That's what we're all aiming for. Well, Suman, it was
absolutely.
so amazing having you on the podcast. We'll have to have you back. I'm sure we could do like 10 episodes on like a saga of the recruiting world, especially right now. But it was such a wonderful chat. So if you guys are listening to this episode and you absolutely loved it, make sure you give us 5 stars, leave any questions or comments below that Suman and I can get back to you on. Otherwise, thanks for coming and we'll definitely chat soon.
Thank you so much. It was so fun.